With games 1 and 2 of the finals over, with the Celtics winning both, takes are already all over the place for Jayson Tatum. We have game 1 where he put up 16, 11, and 5, shooting 6 for 16 from the field with 6 turnovers, and game 2 where he put up 18, 9, and 12, which is a pretty good stat line, but he shot 6 for 22 from the field and 1 for 7 from 3. Then we have Kristaps Porzingis, who was the Celtics' best player in game 1, putting up 20 points in 21 minutes on 8 for 13 shooting, along with 3 blocks, and he was dominating on switches, which the Mavericks, for some reason, kept conceding, and he was getting these easy post mid-range shots over much smaller players. Game 2 was the Jrue Holiday game where he scored 26 points with 11 boards, shooting 11 for 14 from the field. He was getting a lot of easy drop-ins off cuts, these happening most of the time when Jayson Tatum drived and they had to send another body, giving Jrue free layups. So both games in, and Jayson Tatum hasn't been the best scorer for his team in either game. Everything else though, he's been great at. He's driving to the paint so much that the Mavericks have to constantly throw bodies at him, and this gives way to threes or backdoor cuts. He's rebounding well, defending well, but I'm still hearing things like, that's good for a role player, or don't compare him to superstars if these are his standards, and that's fine. I agree being all around is not going to get him that status, while shooting that poorly is not a superstar quality, especially when he's best when he's scoring. I wouldn't say his defense or playmaking are at the same level as his scoring, which is why I say that. Jayson Tatum is one of the most unique players in the NBA, and out of the majority of the stars in the NBA, he's one of the most scrutinized, criticized, and misinterpreted players in the association. Now, there are definitely some fair criticisms that I want to address, but there are also times where the conversation revolving around Tatum often borders on a line where it's either a take which is too extreme, such as Tatum somehow not being the best player on the Celtics. That's ridiculous to me. And the other side of the line stating that he's an MVP candidate and that he should be in conversations with guys like Jokic, Giannis, or Luka. It feels like there's never really a middle ground take where it isn't taken too far, and both this regular season and playoffs has probably been the height of the constant ridicule Tatum faces. Now, unlike a lot of stars we know and love, Jayson Tatum came into the NBA in an unusual situation. It's not every day that a team that was the previous first seed with a conference finals appearance has a top 3 pick in the NBA draft. When you think of a lot of the league's top players, most were drafted to some of the worst teams in the league, and it often took them multiple seasons before they finally made their first playoff appearance. The circumstances for Tatum are quite different. He came into the league drafted by the previously first seeded Celtics as the 3rd overall pick, thanks to the Brooklyn Nets a few seasons prior, and not only was he drafted to one of the best teams in the league at the time, but he was also able to make the conference finals in his first season. For top 3 picks, that's almost unheard of. Outside of his teammate Jaylen Brown, who made the conference finals with the Celtics in the 2017 season, the last top 3 pick to make the conference finals was Darko Milicic, who was drafted 2nd in 2003 by the Detroit Pistons, and he not only made the conference finals, he also won a championship, though he wasn't really much of a factor in that playoff run. For Jayson Tatum, he hasn't had a season where he's missed the playoffs, and he's been to the conference finals the last 3 seasons, including this one, with this being his 2nd appearance in the finals. First off, there are a lot of criticisms around his career that have led to some of the narratives we hear today. One thing you may frequently hear is that he's this playoff choker, and this confirmation bias mainly comes from the 2022 NBA Finals, where he for sure choked. That's without a doubt. But you can't let one series be how you define him as a choker, despite recent instances that refute this take. Just last year in the playoffs, the Celtics came back down 3-2 against the Sixers after Tatum dropped 16 points in the 4th to send it to Game 7. And it's true that for the first 3 quarters, he was absolutely terrible. He was 1 for 14 and they were still winning going into the 4th quarter, which supports the he can play bad and his team will still win portrayal of his career as a star. But as the star of his team, when his back is against the wall, him coming in and dominating that fourth quarter and scoring 16 to prevent them from losing the series needs to be viewed positively. In the Game 7 that came after, he dropped 51 in a win to complete the 3-2 comeback, immortalizing himself as the player to score the most points in a Game 7 ever. Go back to 2022 where they made the finals. They were down 3-2 to the Bucks, and he scored 46 in Game 6 to prevent them from losing the series. But because he has these moments that a lot of stars don't, especially in this year's playoffs where he can go 6 for 20 and the Celtics will still be in the game and even win those games, it becomes a main talking point when discussing him as a player. In my opinion, it's become too excessive, especially when it gets to the point where in this year's finals, the main topic is about Tatum likely not getting the finals MVP, because I think while people pick Dallas to win just because they don't want to root for the Celtics, deep down they know that the Celtics are the better team that will end up winning the series, so the narrative is about Tatum not being that guy, him not even being the best player on his own team, and about him not being a superstar or on the level of some of the players people try to compare him to. The main point of this video that we're now getting into is the superstar talks surrounding Tatum. When your best quality is scoring, but you're not doing that well, and the other things that you may be good at aren't necessarily elite, are you really a superstar? This year in the playoffs he's averaging 25 points per game, 10 rebounds and 6 assists while shooting 43% from the field and 29% from 3. The shooting splits, they're not pretty at all. When you compare him to some of the superstars that we know, offensively, he hasn't been on the same level this postseason, but he also hasn't had a series where he needed to. The Celtics are an extremely good team, so there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, but if they do end up winning the finals with him shooting the way that he is, I can already see what's going to be said about him. And this led me to pose the question, what is a superstar? A lot of the time this gets thrown around to the most elite scorers or the all-around offensive player like a Luka or a Jokic. I thought about it for a bit, but it feels like a lot of my personal definitions can leave out players that I believe should be considered as superstars. Some people may have it more prestigious where there's at most like 5 in the league, while some have the range to maybe 5 to 8 players. In order to look into this, I went into the NBA subreddit and found a somewhat recent thread so I could get some answers. Right at the beginning, people who don't know basketball know who they are, and that would narrow it a bit too much for my liking. I think LeBron, Steph, and KD being those guys due to how much they've influenced the game, so they've become the posters of the game even for those who don't watch. But I don't expect someone who doesn't watch basketball to know Luka, Jokic, Giannis, or Shea, and Tatum isn't in that category either. The ability to consistently carry a team to wins in both the regular season and playoffs, and play up to competition. With this, you could broaden your number of superstars to players like Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, John Morant, and guys like this who may not have won a championship but have had many successful playoff series as the best player, and they look good statistically as well. A player like Embiid is very consistent regular season wise, but in the playoffs, not really. This season he was good in both. I personally consider him a superstar, and I like to think that's more of the consensus, but due to some of the playoff drops he's had, the opinions likely vary. When talking about consistency, that hasn't really fit Tatum these playoffs, but at least in the series against the Pacers where he averaged 30, 10, and 6, he showed that he can be that type of player, and like I talked about earlier, he's carried his team in previous series while they were down. The thing is that with his team as good as they are, he doesn't really have to carry them because one night Jaylen Brown can do that, or Derek White and Drew will get hot from 3, and Kristaps as well can go off depending on the day. Superstar is the top tier of player in the NBA. A superstar would have an argument to be the best player in the league most years. As such, only 5-ish players any given year deserves the title. I hear people like Damian Lillard and SGA being called superstars, and no disrespect to them, but we have a tier for those guys. It's called All-NBA. Now this is a definition that I think makes sense to an extent. We can have the category of superstars with All-NBA right below that, because obviously not every player to make All-NBA is a superstar. With this definition, Tatum would not be a superstar, at least this year. I don't know if you had him in your top 5 last year, I didn't personally. The only thing about this take is that it feels weird for me to not consider a player like Anthony Davis a superstar who isn't in my top 5, and anyone who sits just outside of the top 5 I'd probably consider a superstar as well. I think superstar really depends on the prestige you put around it. You may not want to give the title to so many players to the point where it gets watered down. Well, that's it for me. Let me know your thoughts on this Jayson Tatum discourse down below and your definition of a superstar. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.